The US Senate has passed a sweeping package worth $430 billion covering climate, tax and healthcare. The legislation is a key plank of President Joe Biden's domestic agenda and is being viewed as a victory for the president ahead of crucial midterm elections. Most of it will go towards funding climate projects, making it the largest ever investment to fight global warming in US history. It'll now be sent to the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, where it could pass as soon as this week. The Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said it would benefit future generations.
After more than a year of hard work, the Senate is making history. I am confident the Inflation Reduction Act will endure as one of the defining legislative feats of the 21st century. Our bill reduces inflation, lowers costs, creates millions of good-paying jobs, and is the boldest climate package in U.S. history. This bill will kickstart the era of affordable clean energy in America. It's a game changer, it's a turning point, and it's been a long time in coming. To Americans who've lost faith that Congress can do big things, this bill is for you. To seniors who face the indignity of rationing medications or skipping them altogether, this bill is for you. And to the tens of millions of young Americans who have spent years marching, rallying, demanding that Congress act on climate change, this bill is for you.
The Democrat Chuck Schumer. Well, for more on this, we can cross live to the US and speak to Arise US correspondent Eric Ham. Great to see you, Eric. So the passing by a margin of one vote of what could be one of the most consequential pieces of legislation passed by the US Senate. How big a moment is this, bearing in mind that not a single Republican signed it and two Democratic senators had to be appeased?
Oh, that's absolutely right, Charles. In fact, what we saw was not only was this a 24-hour vote-a-rama, but even at the 11th hour, there were still questions about whether or not this legislation would actually pass. Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona at the 11th hour was deeply concerned about carried interest. This was a piece of legislation, an amendment that would actually provide or would add an additional tax on private equity firms. And that was something that she was against. And so clearly we saw that this could have been like a very fragile situation where the Democrats once again could have failed spectacularly on the floor of the House. But nevertheless, President Biden got another massive win. This was akin to his Build Back Better, something that he has been pushing since coming into office. And after nearly 2 years, the president finally got it. In fact, Charles, this is the biggest piece of legislation that will address climate change that has been passed in the United States in its history. In fact, many believe that this will reduce carbon emissions by nearly 40% over the current guidelines that have already been set. In addition to that, for the first time, this allows the federal government to actually negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies. So there's a lot in this bill. And while many believe that it does not go far enough, clearly, this is a massive win for Democrats. And what it speaks to is the fact that Democrats are looking to the midterm elections, and this certainly gives them a massive win that they can use on the campaign trail.
Nevertheless, Eric, this climate bill also includes provisions to finish a natural gas pipeline, and there are also new drilling licenses off Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. So in a sense, this bill is guaranteeing that the fossil fuel industry will continue to expand.
Yeah, that's right. And the reason for that, Charles, is that you have to look at who the individuals were that were actually pushing this legislation, but not only pushing it, but influencing it. You had West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat from coal country, who wanted to ensure that legacy energy, coal and oil companies maintain a massive influence, but also were not harmed in any way. And so in order to get this bill over the finish line, what we saw were Democrats having to provide policies and amendments in this legislation that not only benefited traditional oil and energy companies, but also private equity firms. Again, you had two Democratic senators who wanted these things. And if they did not go along with it, we could have seen this legislation actually not go through. The question now is, can it get through the House, where we know progressive Democrats are going to rail against those very provisions in this legislation? And also, it remains to be seen where Republicans will stand on this as well.
Well, absolutely. Those are crucial points you make, because, I mean, we have to ask, how big a compromise is this? But it's also interesting, as you mentioned, Eric, that this is, while this is a landmark legislation, it passed with just 51 votes. Not one single Republican voted for this bill. How incredible is that? Because, it suggests that one of the major parties doesn't believe that America needs urgent action on climate change.
Not just climate change, but again, this legislation reduce the deficit. This legislation provides lower drug prices for seniors. And those were key components of this massive bill that Republicans actually voted against. And so this is something that Republicans certainly will have to answer for heading into the midterm elections. But again, what we have seen, Charles, particularly in the United States, as temperatures continue to rise, fires continue to remain out of control, and many of the lakes and water areas around the country continue to recede. Climate change is certainly real, and it's having a massive impact on the United States, even in many red states. And so what we are seeing here are Democrats working together to try to actually address the issue. And also what we're seeing is President Biden attempting to not only go very bold and very big, but also being very aggressive. But in addition to doing that, attempting to try to address the runaway deficit that continues to plague the United States.
And talking about President Biden, he's been visiting Kentucky, hasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. We have seen in the state of Kentucky floods that have killed many people already, including a family, including 4 children that were swept away with these massive floods. President Biden will be traveling to that ravaged area today. And again, this is just another component of climate change that we are seeing play out across the country. And also, this is a rare area where you see bipartisanship, because, again, this is the state where the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, hails from. And you see President Biden traveling to the area and also attempting to provide massive resources to the state as it continues to grapple with this issue.
Nevertheless, Eric, beyond all that, can it be said that there is real skepticism in America about climate change? Lots of climate deniers there.
Yeah, we still continue to see that. And in fact, this is going to play out in very stark terms when this Inflation Reduction Act actually moves over to the House of Representatives. Because, again, that's where you see the extremes on this issue, not only the extremes of those who are proponents or who believe climate change is real, but those who do not. And so we're going to see this play out in very real time. And you're going to see the consequences of the actions from these very heated debates that will take place on the floor of the House this week.
Eric, thanks very much indeed. Eric Ham, Arise U.S. correspondent, talking to me there from Washington.